already? Okay, so we will call this December 8th meeting of the Transportation and Circulation Committee to order. We'll start with a roll call.
Okay, committee member Green.
Here.
Horn.
Here.
Rodriguez.
Here.
Chair Blackerby.
Here. Thank you. All right, we do have a quorum. There are no changes to the agenda. And if there's public comment on any item not on the agenda, speak now or forever hold your peace. Seeing none, we'll move to agenda item number 2, which is a review of the draft 6-year capital improvement program. And we will have a presentation on that.
And Chair Blackerby, that would be John Iwaziak from Engineering will give that presentation.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm John Iwaziak, Principal Civil Engineer for the Public Works Department, and I'm pleased to be here today. Every 2 years, I get to come here and tell you about our Streets Capital Improvement Program. And every 2 years, we have a 6-year capital improvement program, and Streets Capital is a subset of the Streets Fund. And so it includes the capital projects. The capital projects typically are the ones that we put out to contract, and contractors come and do and construct the project typically. And that's the differentiation between the streets operation and maintenance crews, who are the streets crews that go out and do the maintenance and repair, fixing the potholes, paint, striping, concrete repair work, sidewalk repair work, etc. So what we're focusing on here today is the Streets Capital Improvement Program. So the first 2 years of this 6-year CIP are the projects that are realistically thought to be funded in the first 2 years. The subsequent 4 years of the 6-year CIP are the remaining projects that are the need projects, the projects that we have identified that are of need, but some are potentially funded and some may not be funded. And some of those projects may not occur in the first 6 years. They may occur over a very long time. But it was important to identify the capital improvement projects to understand the needs so that they can be prioritized. So today's work session, just giving you an overview of the 6-year CIP. We'll talk about program funding priorities. And then staff has created a draft fiscal year 18 and 19 budget. And we'll talk about next steps. And there are a few takeaways that we'd like to leave with you and provide you a summary. So the purpose of this work session is to obtain your review and public comment on the Streets Capital Improvement fiscal year 18 and 19, since it's a 2-year budget. And in accordance with our circulation element, then prior to the adoption of the CIP, public work sessions, including this one, will be held, and also with the Planning Commission and the City Council to develop project priorities for funding. So the main issue here is that we have a very limited amount of city funds for capital improvement projects. Again, the bigger streets fund funds the streets maintenance crews and the operational and maintenance work that they do. So on our capital projects, we have competing project priorities. We have maintenance of infrastructure, we have safety projects, and then we also have many improvement projects that we don't have funding for. But our emphasis is on the safety and maintenance of our streets infrastructure. So we have developed a draft 6-year capital improvement report, and you've been given a draft copy of it. It will evolve over time, and it's a starting point. And then we will, our Public Works Director will be making a Planning Commission review, and I'll give you a date towards the end of the presentation. And then the budget ultimately gets reviewed and approved by our City Council. Included in your report that you were distributed earlier is our exhibits. And so each one of these I will get into. We have PowerPoint slides of each one of them, and I'll be talking about them. So it's the summary, 6-year summary. Actually, I don't have a slide of that, but you have that in front of you. We have our 6-year CIP individual projects. Again, you have that handout. We'll talk about funding priorities, the budgets, and even look at the last year, fiscal year 17, adopted budget That is the starting point for the fiscal years 18 and 19. What was approved and the revenues that we received for last year, revenues are currently somewhat flat, so we anticipate similar revenues for this fiscal year and even next fiscal year. And one of the highlights of the whole program are the Streets Capital grants. So I want to specifically talk about the fiscal year 18 grants, the ones that we will be getting in the next fiscal year. And then I do have another slide of existing grant funds. And it's rather impressive, so I'll save that for a little bit. Next, I would like to talk about the Streets Capital funding sources. And 2 years ago, we had a little bit of a discussion with the TCC on this topic. And we have Measure A, which is the half-cent sales tax that was approved by the voters, and we get a portion of that for the Streets Capital. A portion of that is also used for the streets operating and maintenance funds, or fund. We also have the utility users tax. So that is the tax that we as residents pay at the City of Santa Barbara for our telephone and power utilities. It's a portion that goes to this utility users tax, and it is one of the revenue sources. And then lately, the grant funds have been our primary funding source for streets capital projects. Then the thing about the grant funds are that they're project specific. We can't just get a grant and then apply it to things as we so choose. It's you apply for the grant for that specific purpose, and it's used for that project, for those purposes. So regarding the program funding priorities, projects that would have significant consequences if not constructed are a high priority. Safety projects fall into that category. Even some of our pavement maintenance work falls into that, because sometimes that stitch in time will save 9, and so there are cost-effective ways to do some pavement repairs. We currently have quite a bit of what we call grind and overlay. The pavement is at a deteriorated point where if we don't do that, then we would face and spend more money to having to reconstruct it. So there are pavement strategies that we have. So that would be an example of significant consequences. And then safety projects are very high priority for us. As accidents occur, some of those corridors become more eligible for funds and then do get our focus. And our traffic engineer here, Derek Bailey, has done a terrific job of getting emphasis to the corridors that need emphasis. So also maintaining infrastructure. As you may know, the City Council has been meeting regularly and working on infrastructure discussions. And so maintaining existing infrastructure before funding new improvements, that's a program high priority. So we value that. It's also a high priority for us to maximize our leveraging to get these grants. And we'll show you some very good examples of how we've done that. And so city policy projects are also important, like our sidewalk infill program. It's important to continue to recognize that, and although we don't really have funding for city funds to be used for that, we've been pursuing grant funds for some of those types of projects. So this, some of you have seen this before in prior presentations, so it really reiterating what I have just been talking about. So it was in your handout, so I wanted to include it. But this item number 4 is really impressive to me in that we've been able to get a number of grant funds under these categories. For example, with our highway bridge program, the typical bridge grants are 88.53% grant funded, and the city has an 11.47% match. And so we've got under construction, or just recently completed in construction, is the Coda Street Bridge. That one's open and has been successfully completed. And we're nearing completion on the Mason Street Bridge on Lower State Street near State and Mason, and that will be soon open to the public for crossing in a few weeks. And then in a few months, we'll have the completion of the Cabrillo Bridge. That will be open to public. It'll take a little while to complete the remaining elements of the project, but that too is scheduled to be open to traffic to return to 4 lanes of travel on Cabrillo Boulevard. So those are examples of where we've gotten grant funding. And on the the Mason Creek Bridge, we were able to get 100% grant funding for the right-of-way and the construction phases of that project. So for approximately $14 million project, I think the city match on that was the $1 in $200,000 range. So that was a tremendous benefit for the city to leverage small amount to get a large amount of money. And so there are other bridge projects that we have grant funding, and sometimes we actually get 100% grant funding for either phases or for the entire project. Our active transportation program, we were successful in getting 100% grant funding for the Quinientos Bridge and the Montecito-Yananali Bridge, 100% grant funding for those two projects. So that's in Montecito, there is a slight shortfall, which will have to make up the difference, but we do have a strong bridge program, and through the sale of some of the properties that are remnant after bridge projects are completed, we're able to subsidize or fund the shortfalls. Again, one of the strong programs or grant activities was the active transportation grant projects. You see a number of them there. I mentioned the Montecito-Yananali Bridge. Another important one, and that bridge is scheduled to go out to construction in the spring of 2017. And also a similar time frame of construction is the Cacique-Soledad bike and ped bridges. Those two are scheduled to be under construction in the spring of 2017. And then shortly after that is the Lower Milpas sidewalk lighting project. That too is slated for construction soon. So we've got a number of projects that are under the Active Transportation Program grant, and staff has done an excellent job in securing some of those competitive grant funds. Also, Mr. Bailey has been very successful in getting Highway Safety Improvement Project grant funding, and there's a number of projects listed there that we've been very successful, and there are some match funds for some of the no matches at all. Derek's saying, okay, no matches. That's great. So no match funding for those types of projects, and as well Measure A grant funds. So in addition to the Measure A funds that we get, there are competitive Measure A grant funds, and we've got a number of projects listed there, and as well as we get some CDBG funds for some of our sidewalk and access ramp and pedestrian improvement type projects. This slide shows you the Streets Capital adopted budgets from 2010 to 2017, and it kind of tells you where we are at today. Revenues have varied over the past years, and revenues right now are flat. And so with some of the increasing costs over the years, you can see that it's fluctuated, but the peak was about $4.7 million into the Streets Capital Program, and that was back in 2014. And it's been declining since, and last year the adopted budget was in the $2.3 million range. And so we're projecting that the next 2 years would be in near similar to that, in the $2.3 million range. So this was the line-by-line item of the adopted Streets Capital Program budget. And the reason I chose this slide is that it shows on the left-hand, the numbers on the left side are the proposed plan, and that was about 2 years ago at this time when we proposed the budget. We were anticipating revenues, and we had a list of projects as shown. And then the mid-cycle adjustment shows that there had to be adjustments made, and then what had ended up happening was that the revenues weren't as what we thought they would be. And so going from approximately $3.2 million proposed budget to an adopted $2.3 million budget, you can see the zeros there where projects ended up either getting reduced or eliminated. So that adopted 2017 budget is the starting point for our fiscal year 18 and 19 budget. And so you can see that now at the bottom of the proposed 18 and 19 budgets, it's where the 17 budget was. So the $2.3 million is now what we are anticipating would be if the revenues are approximately the same. So these are the projects that we anticipate to be funded or proposing to be funded in the 2018 and 19 budgets. So if you like, we can go through them. What's the preference of the committee? Would you like to go through these projects individually? I know that you've had the packets out. What would you prefer?
It's up to the committee. I don't think we need to dig deep into each one of them. I don't know what the next step of your presentation was going to be, but maybe at the end we can ask questions if we have questions about specific ones of these.
I'll briefly just go through them and not elaborate a lot on them. But the bicycle improvements, that's actually a grant. That's the Transportation Development Act grant, so that's an annual right there. So, but the bridge preventative maintenance, that's some of the seed money that we use to get grants for the bridge preventative maintenance. There are, under the Highway Bridge Program, we are planning to obtain grant funding, and that's some of the staff time that would take to prepare. Those funds are used for staff time and from the costs to prepare for those grants, et cetera. Drainage improvements, annually we get either drainage complaints or sometimes collapsed pipes or need of maintaining some drain pipes. So that's for the staff time and for the operation costs to maintain those. Lower Mission Creek, that's one of our city priorities to work with the county flood control and to work with them on their projects and to work on our city projects to get grant funding. And we've been very successful in getting Highway Bridge Program funding, but also in assisting the county to get their REACH projects in between the bridges to get city approvals, et cetera. Pavement maintenance program, that's a whole big story. Won't elaborate on it too much, but we talked about this 2 years ago at a little bit at length, and our pavement maintenance in the city is woefully underfunded. It's part of the large discussions that are going on with the city council, and it's an alarming amount that we would need to get our pavements back into. Their pavements are rated from 0 to 100, and called a pavement condition index. Our pavement levels have been dropping. Our pavement condition index has been dropping. We're now at a level of 61. When I believe I was here 2 years ago, it was at about 64. So we've dropped 3 points in 2 years. What that means is it's going to take more money to get it back to a level where it can be maintained more cost effectively. So getting some large numbers now as estimates. Post-bridge construction mitigation monitoring reporting with our bridges, then we are responsible for some additional monitoring of the landscaping and the vegetation. And so we do have costs incurred there. Some of the good news is we're trying to work with Caltrans to get some grant funding to pay for that as well. Access ramps, as you know, is a priority for us. We do have compliance with ADA, American with Disabilities Act, and we use some of that money as seed money for trying to get grants as well, and for staff time to pursue all the activities associated with ramps. Sidewalk maintenance, this is a number that used to be in the $400,000 to $600,000 range. There's a huge amount of sidewalk maintenance in the city, deferred costs, and we continually work on getting sidewalks repaired to make them safe. Streetlight improvements, unfortunately we do get knockdowns and accidents that and there's a need to replace some of the streetlights. So this is where the facilities division, they use these funds to maintain and repair and replace. And then the last two are the traffic safety capacity and the traffic signal maintenance. These are Mr. Bailey's programs, and he really takes his money seriously and gets stretches those dollars out to get the appropriate maintenance and improvements on the traffic signal and the safety improvements. And he's been very successful at getting grant funding, and I'll elaborate on that in a slide or two. So the bottom line here is that we have the least amount of funding that I've seen in the last 15 years that I've been a manager and associated with some of the streets capital programs. So it is a little disappointing that we have this small amount of funds, and this is a budget that I consider somewhat cut to the bone, bare minimum, so to speak. But it's not all doom and gloom, because I want to share with you the grants that we are either received or receiving in just fiscal year 18, and you can see that it's balanced in that there's maintaining infrastructure grants, there's improvement grants, and there's safety upgrades. So that's really good to see, in that we've got highway bridge program grants, highway safety improvement grants, the active transportation program grants, a number of grants that are either secured or forthcoming. And the bottom line is that with the $2.3 million for fiscal year 18 proposed for the streets capital budget, we've got over $15 million of grant money coming in as well to augment all of that. And again, these grants are specifically for the purposes, so it's not like we can take a grant and do something else with it. They're really for those purposes. In addition to that, this is a slide that shows the additional grants that we have that are in process. So again, I've got them structured with the maintaining infrastructure, improvements, and upgrades. And it's a tremendous amount of grant funding. Recently, staff has worked hard and received active transportation program cycle 3 grant funding, and we've just got $7.1 million on the east side Green Lanes Bike Boulevard gap closure and the west side Bike Boulevard gap closure projects. That's impressive, and it's right in the footsteps of the bicycle master plan getting approved. And congratulations to staff for that effort. And that's a real big milestone for the Streets Capital program to have these projects moving forward. Additionally, we recently got Highway Safety Improvement Cycle 8 grant funding, and we've got several $1 million worth of projects that are lined up to receive that grant funding, including the Carrillo Street Lighting project from downtown to Miramonte going up Carrillo Hill for $1.8 million. De La Vina Street Lighting from Ortega to Mitchell Trena, again, nearly $2 million worth of grant funding. And then State and Alamar pedestrian improvements, I believe, for $250,000. So a significant amount of grant funding, even just recently. So staff is always actively looking for those grant funding opportunities, and many of them are in competitive settings. So we've got a great crew, and kudos to Derek and his staff, and to Rob and his staff, and to Brian and his staff too, because we've got a team of people working on these grant fund applications. So the next steps in the budget process include our Public Works Director going to the Planning Commission, and it's not a presentation like this, so to speak. It's more the Capital Improvement Program. And so this is a subset of the larger city Capital Improvement Program. This is the streets capital component, those are the projects that you typically see. So next spring is when Council will review and update the budget. And then at the end of June, annually, the Council adopts and approves the recommended budget. So our takeaways for today is that there certainly is a need for additional funding for our program shortfalls. And we know that our Council is talking about a potential measure and putting that on the ballot for the fall of 2017. And staff is always looking for funds to augment the funding that we already have. And the limited funding, we certainly need to use wisely. And I think Rob coined a catchy phrase for me the other day, and it was, make it safe, fix it, and then make it better. So with that in mind, we've tried to capture that in our Streets Capital improvement budget. And we've certainly realized that there's a reliance on grants for us to be as successful as we can be. So the proposed fiscal year 18 and 19 is similar to the last approved fiscal year 17, and it coincides with our program priorities. So that ends my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and Mr. Bailey is here to answer any traffic safety, and Mr. Dayton is here, the transportation planning end of things. So
great. Well, yeah, I thank you for the presentation, and I just want to to kind of guide our conversation. We want to stick to what we're kind of tasked with now, which is which is the next 2 years. And so if we can kind of focus the discussion to that, I want to just check before we get too into the weeds if there's any public comment. Doesn't seem like it. There's not. So we can go ahead. Mr. Green?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Very nice presentation, and appreciate the fact that we had a chance to review it in advance so that we could look at some particular things. The chart of 2017 that has blue on it, and the proposed 2018-2019, there's two categories that are missing in the newer one, in the green one. Missing is street engineering and traffic signal improvements. And I guess I'm wondering if they got folded somewhere else, or what happened to those categories that were in 2017.
Those two categories aren't proposed to be funded. It's not. It's like other projects or items that are within your needs list. Those two weren't seen to be funded because of the other priorities. So those were dropped at this time. Derek has some existing funds for his program. So a part of what you're not seeing is some of the carryover of funds that we have. So if there's unused or unspent monies, they carry forward. So we still have some of those funds, but this is what we are planning for the next 2 fiscal years. Another elaboration is that on the engineering side of things, a chunk of that funding was for survey work. So we don't have a survey staff anymore. We do have consulting firms do our surveying, and it's a project-by-project basis. So we've tackled that one another way.
I recognize we're here for the CIP, but has the operational funding gone down also over compared to the recent past?
The streets operational and maintenance, there are changes being made to that component of the department, and there's been managerial changes. There's also been some proposed structural changes. The focus of the streets maintenance and operations staff is to maintain the infrastructure. So our engineering staff has been working with them to have us work closely together on. An example would be the pavement maintenance. They're doing more of the emergency or important failed area repairs. We're calling them point repairs. So we're working with them to get some good work done with streets crews while we have the staff to do that. So that's why they're doing less of the barricades for the parade type of activities. They're more doing the feet on the ground type work. So the streets crews are being reorganized to do more infrastructure maintenance type work.
And the second question, really a second half, what can we as a committee do to help direct more funds or restore the funding level that 2017 started at?
Where it started at. Well, one thing we're asking of the committee is to give your comments on the proposed budget line items, if you think that that's in line. And with regards to what can we do for additional funding, certainly we'd appreciate everyone's vote for if a measure ever did come to the table, or any way by which we can send messages to our organizations and groups and the state. We're not alone. The city has these funding shortfalls for infrastructure like many cities do in the state and in the country, and pavement maintenance is a prime example. The city isn't alone where our pavement condition indexes have been declining, and it's a state known statewide, it's known federally wide. So there's a limit to what we can do, but certainly the acknowledgement that there are the needs, that's an important component of identifying and then prioritizing the work.
Ms. Rodriguez?
Yeah, very nice presentation. Thank you very much. I just would like to understand a little bit more the rationale for, or the reason for taking the adopted 2017 as your starting place for 2018-19. I can intuit why you might have done that, but I just thought it would be nice to have a little explanation as to why that number was chosen.
Sure. Well, the number comes from what was adopted. So we anticipate similar revenues. So it starts with the revenues, how much money is coming in. Then we look at our expenses. And so the streets fund gets X amount, and then the operations and maintenance gets a portion of that, and then the remnant goes into the capital. So I've showed you that slide where the varying amounts over time. I guess it's back. So
The slide that showed your flat revenue.
so we're anticipating a flat revenues in the next year or two. Again, some costs continue to go up. Annual increases in costs due to labor or materials, et cetera. So those are things that we have limited control over. Right now, we're experiencing higher costs for construction. We're getting less bidders on our streets capital projects than we have in the recent past. And so we've even had to rebid our pavement our pavement capital program work. This is going to be the third time we're bidding it because we rejected the prices. We weren't getting competitive bids, so we've restructured it in a manner that which we anticipate that we're going to get competitive bids, and bids are due next week, so we hope that we're going to be successful in that. So there's ways that we're trying to make the dollars go as far as they can.
Thank you.
Other questions? No? Any other comments or anything? Yeah, Ms. Warren?
I was looking for where the green stripes for bicycle paths would be, and I actually found it after I had that question. I was looking for where it would be categorized, and then I saw it in the grants, but not in the other places.
Correct. It's in the grants. That's
So,
right. The recent
yeah.
It's fully funded from the grants, so we don't have to program.
And it really never has been done before, right? So
We haven't completed any green lanes at this time, but we're planning on it.
no.
Yeah.
Okay, and I just wanted to thank you for these, the presentation that we had. The handouts were so much better to follow than 2 years ago.
Oh, good.
What a difference. They were really wonderful.
Great. And
Easy to follow.
if there are any improvements that you'd like to see for the future, we'd be glad to hear them and strive to try and make it as succinct and then understandable as we can. Because it's a lot of material, a tremendous amount of material.
I noticed.
Information. So I'm glad that you were able to follow it. And if there are any comments of how we can do better the next time, we'd always like to hear that.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate it. And I remember the years during the recession where we're like, oh, man, sales tax is down, UT's down. Maybe when the economy bounces back, then the money we'll have to use will go up. And it sort of did for a couple of years, but it's sad to see it trending down the way it is. And it's not, even though sales tax is going reasonably well, it's the other stuff that's dwindling, obviously. So, yeah, but I know you're doing the best with what you have, and so appreciative to staff for all the grant work. And I keep telling you, but you keep raising our expectations. And we were super impressed when it was 6 million ATP, and now it's 7. So we're fully expecting 8 next cycle. Just know that you've made your bed here, and we're gonna expect more and more. So anyway, I really appreciate it, and if there are no other questions, I think that's it for that item.
Okay, thank you.
Which would then mean we would be ready to adjourn. If there are any announcements or anything, nope. Okay, so a motion to adjourn would be in order.
So moved.
All right. A second by Ms. Horn. And all those in favor? Aye. Great. All right, we're adjourned.